Welcome to 6 Gun Guitars. This is the electric bass series. We're starting now to mark up the neck and to set it up to route for the truss rod. Truss rod was already built in an earlier video. The fretboard was already inlaid and tapered in an earlier video. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the layout here on the neck. Laying out on the neck is really important. You can get everything marked out from the location of the bridge to how long the fretboard is to where the truss rod needs to be to where your body breaks are, everything. You get it all laid out first. That way when you have to go cut it, you know it's right and you don't have to second guess it. So I'll take you over to the bench and we'll show you what this looks like right on the piece. Okay, on the piece here itself, I went ahead and I marked out location on the end for my bridge, and I marked out a location at the other end for my nut, and for also the extra hangover that I've got on here, which I'm going to ramp. This is the little bit extra hangover so you can see that. I'm going to also ramp this into my headstock, and I think that'll look kind of nice. So I marked that location, I marked my nut, I also came on here and I marked my truss rod. And you can see some of these things here. I went ahead and just marked a little spot for where my bridge needs to be, right there. And then I drew a little diagram of my bearing nut and my adjusting nut right there and the recess I'm going to have to dig for it. I got a nice solid line down the middle that shows where the truss rod goes and where it ends. And then I've got my nut, I got my little hangover, and I've got the angle start on my headstock. And you can see that here. So I got the headstock that I drew on the side. It's 5/8 of an inch thick and it tapers on down to 3/4 on the end, and that's without the fretboard on there, so it'll be a nice thick neck. And I've got my angle on my headstock, which, depending on this, it may be a shade shallow, and if it is, what I'm going to do is just come back and I'll put some string retainers on the other side to hold it down. But I got all this set up so that way after I route the truss rod and fret the fretboard and get it glued down there in place, I'll be able to come back really, really easily and cut all this stuff off on the bandsaw. So we got all that marked out. Easiest way to do this is to give yourself a few inches out at the far end for where your bridge location is going to start. Now I gave myself another 3.5 inches back here, so I got plenty to work with no matter how big that bridge is. I believe it's only 2 inches deep, but if it is a little bit more, a little bit less, I've got plenty to work with here. This is a 48-inch piece, so I'm only going to keep about 46 inches of it or 45 inches of it, so I can lose an inch, doesn't really matter. And then came along and marked where the end of my fretboard is, and that's going to be where the end of my truss rod adjustment is. So you can see that there as well, that'll line right up. And then this lines right up with the top. Alright, so I've got the truss rod slot routed. You can see that there. What I did was I measured the depth of my truss rod up here, and I set the router table to that depth. And I actually did a half pass first, just to kind of make sure that I was nice and right down the center. And so I did that half pass first, maybe a little less than 1/4 inch deep, just to kind of verify. And then I went ahead and reset the depth. So now the end of this truss rod goes all the way down in here. And then the other end here, that's going to be a little taller. It's going to go from the top to the bottom here. I took the last portion of the guitar where the body is actually going to be, the body to here, and I went ahead and went that depth from there to there. So that way once I carve out this little part here for the bearing block and the adjustment nut, I'll be able to sink that right in and it'll go all the way down. Now there's a little hump right here. I'll probably come back with a small chisel and just kind of ramp that down so it's not in the way. And then we'll be ready to lay this in and glue the fretboard right on top over that, and that'll all fit in there really nice. On this fretboard, what I'm going to do first before I glue it in is I'm actually going to obviously sand these guys down, because I just glued them. Sand these guys down, and I'm actually going to fret the neck first. And the reason I'm doing that, and I'll show you this later, is it'll allow me to get the belt sander up against the side here to go ahead and trim those fret ends. It makes things a lot faster when you're trimming a lot of fret ends. So the next thing I'm going to do is get my Dremel out with a small spiral cutting bit, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to recess all this stuff out so that way the hardware at the end of the truss rod can fit in. And I'm not really too concerned with digging a big hole here because again my body wings are going to be starting up here. It's about a full 4 inches away from it. So I'm going to have a lot of bulk in here. So if I've got to sink that down and I've got to dig out a lot of wood, not really a big problem. I'm just going to try to make sure I don't go too wide so that way I can put a little plate on the end of here out of an offcut that matches this, so that way it won't look too obvious that there's a truss rod adjustment down there. So now I'm going to grab that Dremel with the router base, and I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit on here, and I'm going to start digging this out. You can also dig it out with a chisel if you want. If you don't have it, it's a slower method, but it still works. You just go ahead and notch all your outlines first, and then come back in and dig to them, and just keep on repeating that. But because I do have a Dremel tool, I am going to use it. So we'll be back in a second. I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so I routed out the majority of the hole here. I've got pretty good clearance at the end of this for the nut. I might give it just a little bit more, but probably not too much. I'm going to profile these wings down a little bit so you can get a wrench in there pretty good. Other than that, the only thing I need to do is drop it down just a little bit more, so that way you can take the bearing block right here. So I set my Dremel to that depth, and what I'm going to do actually is, I'm going to reduce that just a little bit because it's a little bit too much to cut in one shot. So, all right, so got it there, and we'll go ahead and start and make our plunge, and we'll start riding it out. I don't know It's a little difficult to see, but you can see here when we're done. Alright, so we're getting a little deeper. It's definitely going in a little further than it used to. So I'm just going to keep on doing that until we get to the full depth, and that'll be nice and flush in there. Alright, so now we're a little bit closer, and you can see that I got the truss rod down to where it fits in here. It fits the entire length, and it fits in there pretty nice. The only issue that I have is the front of the nut here. There's really not a lot of clearance for when I adjust this thing in and start pulling rod back, which is going to actuate the truss rod. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come this way just a little bit more, and I'm going to go ahead and clear myself out maybe about another 1/4 inch, so that I've got room up here. And again, I'm going to use the Dremel tool with the router attachment for that, but it can be chiseled out as well. You can kind of see I kind of ramped the end in here a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing here just a little. I'm just to make sure I leave myself just enough room on both sides to make myself a little patch for this so that you can't tell that it's sitting here. And so now I'm going to grab that Dremel and go ahead and lengthen this area just a little bit. And then the truss rod fitting will be pretty much complete at that point. Alright, so the truss rod route is now complete, and you can kind of see the way that it looks in there. I've got a little bit deeper piece for my bearing block, and I've got the room for my adjustment nut there. This part is just a little bit deeper to accommodate the length, or accommodate the extra thickness, and it ends right there. So when we put it all together, that guy goes there, truss rod slides right in, and the neck will come right over the end of that nut. And that's how it'll end up looking. And again, I'll make a little cover. We'll make a little cover in one of these next videos here that'll help cover that. And that's just a really thin piece, you know, a little thicker than veneer, but not much. That's just going to go on there, and I'll probably just put a couple of screws, you know, right on either side just to kind of hold it in. And that does it for taking care of the truss rod and getting it routed into the neck.